26 years ago, almost to the day, my Palo Alto story began. I was a small, freckle-faced kid entering his first day of kindergarten at Duveneck Elementary. I knew no one, because I wasn't like the other kids who lived down the block from the school. I lived in Boulder Creek, a small mountain town about an hour away. But I was fortunate, because my mother taught at Duveneck, and I was welcomed into the Palo Alto community. I didn't know it at the time, but that was the start to a lifetime of memories, friendships, and lessons that made me the person I am today. I recall limitless Palo Alto memories that have formed my views of this town. Ice skating at the Winter Lodge in February, hiking the Dish in early spring, the May Fete Parade symbolizing the start of summer, and admiring our tree canopy that decorates our streets with a mosaic of browns and orange in the fall. I remember marching in our school's Halloween costume parades and watching performances at the Children's Theater. Palo Alto was home, even before my family and I moved in. I attended school at Duveneck, Green, and Pali, where I learned from the most incredible and passionate teachers. I received my undergraduate degree at UC Irvine and my law degree from Santa Clara University School of Law. During law school, I searched for ways to be involved in the community, and I found that opportunity on the Palo Alto Human Relations Commission, whose mission touched me deeply. The Human Relations Commission focuses on the most vulnerable in our community. We address issues concerning mental health, veterans struggling to find housing, senior citizens' needs, those with physical disabilities, the unhoused, and those struggling to put food on the table. I was honored to serve as the commission's chair and vice chair. Shortly after the 2016 election, I was asked by residents of the Buena Vista Mobile Home Park to help organize an event to assuage the deep fears of the immigrant community who were concerned about possible deportations due to the election of Donald Trump. The event was a great success. Thanks to the help of Supervisor Joe Simidian and other local activists and organizations, we were able to help provide legal resources and educational information to these at-risk residents. In the spring of 2017, Supervisor Simidian contacted me and asked me to serve on the Santa Clara County Human Rights Commission. He told me that the county commission had become stagnant, and he wanted me to bring my passion, energy, and experience to help revive the commission and make it an effective body, as I had done during my 4 years on the Palo Alto Human Relations Commission. I was torn. I didn't want to leave my city commission, but when Joe asks you to do something, it's really hard to say no. I was appointed to the Human Rights Commission in April of 2017, and by June, I was voted by my fellow commissioners to chair the commission's Justice Review Committee. The committee's job is to provide oversight of our county's law enforcement agencies and county jails. In 2018, I was also voted by my fellow commissioners to serve as the vice chair of the Human Rights Commission. During my time on the commission, I have fought for issues of inclusion and equity. My proudest moment was when I successfully led the effort against a proposed policy change that would have allowed for cooperation between county law enforcement and ICE agents. I'm also the chair of the Palo Alto Midtown Residents Association, the largest residents association in the city. In this role, I have worked closely with city staff and have been an intermediary between my neighbors and city government. It is also in this role that I have helped grow community in my neighborhood and have become frustrated with the frequent lack of communication and collaboration between the city and its residents. Too often it has felt like the city merely communicates with us in order to check off a box in their process, but don't actually incorporate our concerns into city policy. In addition to serving the community as a social justice advocate and neighborhood leader, I'm also a teacher in our schools. I previously taught at JLS, and I always laugh when anyone asks how I will handle the competing personalities on council and the pressures on the dais, because clearly they have never been the lone adults in a room with 30 seventh graders. If you can handle that, you can handle anything. Today, I am the Student Activities Director at Pali, and I teach US history at Gunn. Throughout my various roles in this city, as a commissioner, neighborhood association leader, block preparedness coordinator, or teacher, I've had the privilege and honor to talk with people from across the city who represent a wide segment of our population. But there is no conversation that has stuck with me more than one I had with an unhoused woman several years ago. She grew up in Palo Alto, but I moved away to the Central Valley after marrying her husband. She fell on hard times. Her husband became an alcoholic, lost his job, became abusive. I stood there on the corner of University and Waverly for a half hour listening to her story. She told me how she finally gained enough strength to leave him. She spent all her money on a bus ticket back to Palo Alto, and I asked her why she came back here. She said, because Palo Alto is my home. I talked to her about my commission, explained the various services our city offers, and we shared some fond memories of growing up here. She was an incredibly gracious woman. I'll never forget her struggle. She is Palo Alto. She is as much a Palo Alton as as my wife, as the vice mayor, as anyone here. Because Palo Alto is not about money. It's not about career advancement. It's not about who has the biggest house on the block or whose kid goes to which prestigious university. Palo Alto is about home. She is why I'm running. Because Palo Alto represents far more than merely a place to do business. I'm running because of the teacher who worked next door to me last year at Gunn, an exceptionally talented educator who taught me so much, but whose life was uprooted from this community because she and her husband could no longer afford to live in the Bay Area and moved to Oregon in order to purchase a home for their family. I'm running for my students, like Malu, who fear a future where climate change has made our air unbreathable and where fires and devastating storms become everyday occurrences. They already are. I am running for my many friends of color who fear that they will be targeted by police merely because of the color of their skin. I'm running because I believe it is government's responsibility to do good and to provide opportunities for those who have historically been underrepresented here in Palo Alto. Throughout this campaign, I've been talking to people across this city, sharing my belief that Palo Alto has reached an inflection point. Both the pandemic and the social unrest across the nation in furtherance of Black Lives Matter have shone a light on the injustices pervasive across our nation. This unprecedented crisis has provided us a unique opportunity to have what many commentators have labeled a great reset. A small window of time where we can forego the antiquated systems that cause so many of our persistent problems like affordable housing, traffic, social injustice, and climate change, and instead forge ahead with a future that is diverse and equitable. Today, I'm going to share with you my vision for how we are going to create that future together. First, let's discuss the state of the economy and the need for us to rebuild our local economy in order to get through this recession. Palo Alto is experiencing an unprecedented economic crisis due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The city cut $40 million from its budget, caused mostly by a 43% reduction in sales tax and a 44% loss in hotel taxes. The future of some of our beloved businesses is uncertain. Our city's unemployment rate has more than doubled. It's very possible we will see our local property values decrease. Budget cuts, while necessary, must prioritize people and the services that we rely on over investments in infrastructure that can be postponed or even reevaluated in the context of a new future. I, like many of you, was in shock this spring when City Council was considering cutting essential city services like public safety, libraries, senior and teen services, while increasing rather than reducing capital investments. My priorities for a balanced budget will focus on areas that can be temporarily suspended without long-term consequences for our city, such as suspending paying down city pensions, freezing new hires and salary increases, and by rethinking how we typically conduct business by relying less on expensive outside consultants and utilizing the natural talents our own community offers. In addition, I will bolster the Palo Alto Small Business Relief Fund and the Small Business Recovery Grant Program so that struggling businesses, some of which have served our community for decades, stay in Palo Alto. Let's be clear, we can't save all businesses. I wish we could. But we can do more to help those struggling during this pandemic. We must also invest in our business community and provide them the tools they need in order to be successful here. I would promote the hiring of an economic development manager who is experienced in bringing new businesses to town that complement existing businesses so as to attract new people and shoppers into our retail core. This person could also recommend programs, events, incentives to support and attract retail services that create an experience for shoppers. This will be especially important as we look to recover from the pandemic's effects. Palo Alto is one of the only cities in the Bay Area that does not have such a critical position. Next, let's discuss the issues that is the most controversial and pressing here: housing. Access to quality, affordable housing has vexed Palo Alto for decades. This is an issue that my wife and I are all too familiar with. As you're aware, we're both teachers, and we rent a small one-bedroom apartment here in Midtown. We live with constant concern that the next rent increase could force us out of our home, especially given inadequate protections for renters. Housing is consistently the most talked about issue in our local campaigns, and yet since 2015, only 555 new housing permits have been issued, the vast majority of which is luxury housing. There is no question we need more housing, but a city's policies reflects its values, and Palo Alto's housing policies have consistently failed the needs of our most vulnerable residents and lack protections for displacement. I will work collaboratively with my council colleagues to create housing policies that promote equity and inclusion. In 2018, Palo Alto met only 6% of its very low-income regional housing needs allocation requirements. And yet city leadership continues to talk about adding more luxury housing, despite meeting our market rate goals at the expense of low-income and very low-income housing. Palo Alto should embrace our city's very own comprehensive plan of creating 3,545 to 4,420 new housing units by 2030. And we should directly target production to our RHNA numbers, which requires 60% of those new housing units be low-income housing. The three key steps to our housing strategy should be: first, rebalancing the jobs housing ratio; second, preserving existing affordable housing; and third, investing in affordable, below market rate housing. Let's go through those. The first step, rebalancing the jobs housing ratio, simply means we must stop making our jobs housing ratio worse. There's no question our astronomical housing costs are directly connected to our jobs housing ratio, one of the worst in the nation. When cities add more jobs than housing, the price of housing increases. For example, Palo Alto added nearly 14 jobs per new housing unit between 2011 and 2014. And during the same period, rents increased by 33%. Palo Alto must aim for jobs housing parity. Office space leases for approximately $12 per square foot, whereas luxury housing only rents for $4 a square foot, and affordable housing is far less. If we leave it to the market will seek the greatest profit: office space. Instead, we must limit office space, increase the impact fees developers must pay, have developers of large commercial properties pay to fully mitigate their impacts. The second step, preserving existing affordable housing. Within my first 6 months, I will submit a colleague's memo advocating for Palo Alto to adopt a no net loss policy. This policy would prohibit the destruction of housing if it is not going to replace that housing with an equal or greater amount of housing. It would also prohibit the destruction of below market rate housing unless the current residents are guaranteed a right of first refusal on the newly built units, rental assistance during their time of displacement, and a guarantee that the newly built units will be offered to them at the same rental price or less. The most affordable housing we have is in our existing housing stock, and we must preserve it. Had this policy existed, we never would have lost the affordable housing and the vibrant community at the President's Hotel. Finally, we must invest directly in affordable housing and not rely on the market to create housing through a trickle-down model that has not delivered sufficient affordability. We need to create opportunities for our teachers, first responders, nurses, and others who serve our community so that they can continue to live in the same city they serve. We must expand our income sources and diversify our portfolio. Businesses should pay their fair share through a business tax for the imbalance in jobs to housing that has allowed corporations to thrive at the expense of our community. Of course, this business tax should not be implemented until after our economy recovers and would not be applied to the many small businesses that serve our community. We should also explore other tax sources being used across the country, such as a speculation tax and a vacancy tax, to prevent Palo Alto homes being used merely as an investment tool. We should consider the viability of building housing in the Stanford Research Park. We must boost our impact fees on new commercial development, increase our inclusionary zoning rate, and finally enact the Palmer Fix to require a percentage of rental units be reserved for low-income earners. This policy was in place in Palo Alto for many years with great success. City Council has had the ability for the last 2 years to enact this policy fix, but they have failed to act. This would be one of my top priorities. Next, let's discuss another issue so important to all of us: traffic and transportation. Traffic consistently ranks as the #1 issue for most Palo Altans, but every year our traffic increases. Our city's congestion is nothing new, but it has continued to worsen as large-scale office buildings are approved, bringing in thousands of new drivers every day. And if we do not decide on grade crossing separations soon, our city will see unprecedented gridlock. Now, Palo Alto has an ambitious goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions to 80% of 1990 levels by 2030. Transportation makes up 60% of Palo Alto's greenhouse gas emissions. We will not be able to meet that goal if we are not able to reduce the dependency on single occupancy vehicles commuting into our city every day. I am so honored to have received the endorsement of the Sierra Club, and I believe my policies will help not only relieve traffic congestion, but also make meaningful strides towards our climate goals. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a horrific tragedy, no question. But shelter in place has revealed the potential of commuterless work. The County of Santa Clara, in conjunction with local jurisdictions, is exploring policies to promote greater telecommuting after this pandemic has ended. Palo Alto should also consider exploring policies to promote and encourage telecommuting, so we can begin switching from a commuter town plagued with traffic congestion to a resident-focused community. Not only will this reduce traffic, but all the woes it brings with it: parking demand, congested streets, and unhealthy air quality. And it could feasibly free up office space for additional housing production. We can and must have a city that recognizes that people use cars in the Bay Area, but also construct new bike lanes and walking paths to strongly encourage alternatives to single occupancy vehicles. We must invest in more public transportation, partner with local jurisdictions to expand public transportation, and collaborate with the school district to provide shuttles to schools, and promote different forms of travel, such as ride-sharing apps or encouraging employees to carpool to work. In addition, no new developments in Palo Alto should be approved without an aggressive traffic demand management plan in place. Currently, Palo Alto's TDM policies lack actual enforcement, and developers have been allowed to make empty promises without fear of reprisal. My proposal would condition new development on the developer's ability to create a traffic plan that will reduce the impact of anticipated traffic by 30%. The developer would then have to come back to council within a year after the project is completed to prove their plan has worked. Any amount of traffic over 30% would be assessed a penalty. The fees collected by the city for non-compliance could be invested in citywide traffic decongestion projects, such as additional bike paths and pedestrian routes. I want to talk about building a stronger government-community partnership. I believe strongly in that government-community partnership to address the needs of our residents and our business owners, especially those small business owners who serve our community's needs. Government should be by the people and for the people, rather than too often embracing external influences over the will of the voters. Our city council is directly elected by us, the residents. It should represent our voice. As your council member, I will advocate for greater government transparency, more communication and stronger partnerships with our neighborhoods, better utilizing the natural talents of our residents, and strengthening our code enforcement to enforce city rules and regulations that are intended to maintain our quality of life. Palo Alto deserves greater government transparency and accountability and more robust accounting of decisions. Lastly, I want to discuss Black Lives Matters and the need for police reform. Now, my father is a retired law enforcement officer, and I used to work in the district attorney's office, right here at the Palo Alto courthouse. I've worked closely with our city's police officers, gone on ride-alongs, and I have incredible respect for the work they do every day keeping our communities safe. Most of our officers are incredibly competent women and men who are dedicated to protecting and preserving the peace. But as in all police departments, there are sometimes a few bad actors. But policing is not like other professions, where it is tolerable to have a few bad employees. When we entrust a person with a gun and a badge and the legal authority to detain and arrest someone, that officer must have the integrity and the trust of the people they are sworn to keep safe. When that trust has been violated, when there is a history of misconduct, that must be cause for termination. We have had too many incidents of our officers violating that public trust, and they must be held accountable. Racial slurs, homophobic ad hominem remarks, the violent treatment of peaceful persons, and the disproportionate rate at which persons of color are arrested in this community must end. I'm currently working on an ad hoc committee at the county level to propose police reform changes to our Board of Supervisors. These issues of equity and inclusion are issues I've been working on long before the tragic death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and countless others. In fact, just last April, I wrote an op-ed in the Palo Alto Weekly, where I raised the alarm bell on the disproportionate rates at which this pandemic was impacting communities of color and the socioeconomically disadvantaged. These issues are not merely political talking points for me. They are the issues that get me up in the morning and truly provide my life purpose. As a council member, I will always lead and make decisions from that same social justice lens. And I would make the following proposed changes to our police department. First, we must enact the 8 count weight reforms not already implemented and strengthen those that are. Second, revise our hiring policies to recruit officers with no misconduct allegations. Third, promote the hiring of more women and minorities. Studies show that when there are more women in police departments, the rate of police misconduct, violence, and shootings precipitously drops. Fourth, ensure greater transparency and accountability. A well-functioning democracy has to be transparent in order to be held accountable to the public. Law enforcement is no exception. Fifth, require an independent auditor's reporting of officer complaints rather than the city's own human resources department. Sixth, require that the police auditor report directly to the city council and have that report be made public within a reasonable time frame. And seventh, reimagine community policing by having mental health professionals respond to non-criminal matters. Our next council will face a myriad of issues, each one as complex as the next. A city that innovated the world surely can solve the problems we are facing here at home. We are the birthplace of the technological revolution. We are where Facebook, HP, Google, Tesla, and countless others began. The home of Steve Jobs, John Steinbeck, Jeremy Lin, Steve Young, and more. We are the 5th most educated city in the country, neighbors to Stanford University, and both our high schools are ranked among the top 4 public high schools in the state. We are a city comprised of young and old, rich and poor, Democrats and Republicans. We represent all nationalities and all faiths. But most of all, what defines us as Palo Altans are the values that we share as a community. As Martin Luther King once said, we are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. My friends, we must no longer sit on the sidelines. My wife and I are in this race in order to ensure our future children grow up in a city that puts values ahead of dollars, nature's flora and fauna over urban convenience, and who places people first ahead of special interests. The needs are urgent. The time to act is now. Please, help me be your voice on City Council. And I promise you, I will work tirelessly to always put your needs first. Thank you so much for joining us today.